been working on getting the Blender animations I've made over into Unreal today. I've been using the third person starter project as the template for this. So I started with doing the blend space for run walk, which I think is kind of fun. Basically you're starting with the minimum speed, which is 0, and the maximum for this player character, which is 500, and depending on the speed that the character is going, it will blend between the idle animation here, the walk animation here at 230, and the run animation at 500, which is max speed. So as I pan through this, you can see he starts in idle, starts to kind of walk on the spot slightly, or kind of shuffle. And then we're going into a pretty brisk walk, and then transitioning into the run animation I made. So that's kind of fun. There's not really too much to that. So the thing I did struggle on a bit was the landing animation, not the animation itself, but the additive part. So when I was following along with the third person project, looking at how they did their animation blueprint, I didn't realize that they were doing this as an additive animation, which I'll explain when we get to the animation blueprint. But at least from my understanding now is that I need to set this base pose type to be the same keyframes as whatever my base pose in the animation blueprint is, so that the delta between the frame I set here, and in my case I'm blending between this landing pose and the locomotion idle pose, so I need both of these animations to finish on the same keyframes, so that there's no difference between the poses. And well, you can see here you get the landing animation, then it's blending into the idle animation. But if I was to just pick some random, let's say it ended on frame 10, now there's going to be a big delta between frame 10 and frame 25, which is the idle pose starting frame, or starting pose. So if I now run this, we'll see what I was running into earlier. Yeah, it would blend and do some pretty unexpected things. So it is blending into the idle pose, but because there's a big delta between the base pose, which is the idle pose, and the frame I've chosen here, yeah, it's adding that to the base pose and ending up in some kind of wacky locations. So yeah, I kind of get the concept of this, but I struggle to explain it because, well, maybe I don't get this fully. Because you can also select the actual idle animation here, and that works as well. I'm not sure if that's because my landing animation does end on the same frame, so it's blending into the first frame of the idle pose, but I'm going to do it the way that it was done in the third person project. So just take the final frame of this animation, which is going to match up. And then the rest of the stuff was just in the animation blueprint itself. So this is all copied from the third person project. It's basically getting a reference to the character, or the character here in the movement controller, and then just some useful movement data. So whether the character's moving, what their ground speed is, should they be moving, should they be doing a moving animation, as in like are they moving really slowly, and are they falling? And those are needed for the animation graph. There's not too much to explain in here. This is very simple. Just if it should move, execute the run walk animation given the speed given the current ground speed. So that's the number that's going into the blend space. And if it shouldn't move, then go back to the idle animation. And then in here is where it gets more interesting. So I hadn't used these before. These are state alias, and basically what these are, you can have a combination of states that you've already made. So in here we have, look at what all of my states are: locomotion, landing, fall loop, jump, and you can see them here. So it's basically a way to have a composite of two states that you've already made. So this is saying, which states would I be able to land from? If I'm falling, I can land eventually. And if I'm jumping, I can also go into a landing state. And the rule for that is if I'm not falling. So if I was in the fall loop and now I'm not falling, land. Or if I'm jumping, but now I'm not falling, land. So the landing animation is what we just talked about. This is where I ran into some issues because I hadn't set up the animation to be additive like I explained. But yeah, this works now. So the base pose is the locomotion, which is the idle pose when it's not moving. And then it blends the landing animation into that. And then same here, so we have another one of these composite nodes where I'm saying if we're moving or we are landing, then if we are falling, as in we're not on the ground and the Z velocity is positive, so we're falling upwards, that means we are, so we're either landing but now we're falling upwards, or we are moving and now we're falling upwards, which means we are jumping. So do the jump animation. Or we are landing or moving and now we're falling, so just go straight into the fall loop, which plays the fall loop animation. And then if we have gone to the jumping animation, so we play the jumping animation if we are essentially falling upwards, so off the ground and moving up, play the jump. And then ran into a little bit of trouble here. I'm not sure how they implemented it in the third person projects because it wasn't like this, and I get warnings when I try to do it the way they did it. Maybe they've done it somewhere else in the blueprint, but essentially I've settled with this for now, which is saying if we are moving up slowly or less than slowly, so moving down, and we are falling, as in we're not on the ground, then transition into the for loop. Oops. So the reason for this is if you can jump really high, you don't want to stay in the jump animation until you're going back down, because at some point after you've played the jump animation and you're still moving up, once you get to kind of a slower speed, then you kind of want to be falling upwards. You kind of want to be playing that full loop animation even though you're still going upwards. So this is what I'm doing here. I'm just saying if we're falling upwards relatively slowly or we're falling downwards, then we can now transition out of the jump animation and play the full loop. And that is everything. I've probably explained that pretty poorly, but here it is. We've got a little ledge to jump off. You can see his head kind of tilts down into the full animation. He's got the little bit of rebound off the floor there. We can just walk around. We can sprint. We can jump. And that's everything. That's all the animations from Blender now working.